The morning sun cast golden rays through the tall windows of Ravenshire Palace as Prince Alexander stood on his private balcony, watching the kingdom wake beneath him. At 28, he had everything a man could desire: wealth, power, respect, and a throne that would soon be his. Yet something deep inside him felt empty, like a hollow echo in a grand cathedral. Princess Isabella entered his chambers quietly, her silk slippers making no sound on the marble floors. She had been his closest friend since childhood, their families united by ancient treaties and shared borders. What most people didn't know was that their friendship had slowly blossomed into something much deeper over the years. "You're thinking too hard again," Isabella said softly, joining him on the balcony. Her long auburn hair caught the morning light, and her green eyes sparkled with the intelligence that had always drawn him to her. Alexander smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "The wedding preparations are almost complete. Next month I'll marry Lady Margaret and unite our kingdom with the Northern Territories. Father says it's the most important alliance in our history." Isabella's heart clenched, but she kept her expression neutral. She had known this day would come. Royal marriages were about politics, not love. She had accepted her own engagement to Duke Edmund of Westmore for the same reasons. Yet standing here with Alexander, watching the pain in his eyes, she realized she couldn't remain silent any longer. "Do you love her?" Isabella asked, though she already knew the answer. Alexander was quiet for a long moment. Lady Margaret was beautiful, well-educated, and perfectly suitable for a future queen. She was also cold, calculating, and treated the common people with disdain. Their few conversations had been polite but empty, like reading from a script. "She will make a good queen," he said finally. "That's not what I asked." Alexander turned to face Isabella fully. In her eyes, he saw everything he had been trying to ignore: the shared laughter, the midnight conversations about changing the kingdom for the better, the way his heart raced whenever she entered a room. He saw the woman who challenged his thoughts, supported his dreams, and made him want to be a better man. "No," he whispered. "I don't love her. I love—" He stopped himself, knowing that speaking those words would change everything. Isabella stepped closer, her hand finding his. "I know. I've always known." The electricity between them was undeniable. They had spent years dancing around their feelings, bound by duty and expectation. But now, with his wedding approaching and her own engagement looming, the weight of unspoken truth had become unbearable. "Isabella, we can't," Alexander began, but she placed a finger to his lips. "Just for this moment," she said. "Let's forget about kingdoms and duties and politics. Let's just be Alexander and Isabella." For one perfect moment, they were just two people in love, standing in the sunlight without the weight of crowns on their heads. Alexander cupped her face in his hands, memorizing every detail: the constellation of freckles across her nose, the way her eyes closed when she was happy, the soft curve of her smile. But reality crashed back like a cold wave. Voices echoed from the courtyard below as servants prepared for the day's activities. Wedding planners would arrive soon to finalize details for his marriage to another woman. The world was watching, expecting Prince Alexander to fulfill his destiny. "We should go," Isabella said, reluctantly stepping back. "People will notice if we're both missing." As they walked back through the palace corridors, Alexander felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Portraits of his ancestors lined the walls, each face a reminder of duty fulfilled, of personal desires sacrificed for the greater good. His grandfather had given up his true love to marry for alliance. His father had done the same. It was the royal way. But something had changed in those moments on the balcony. A seed of possibility had been planted, and Alexander found himself questioning everything he had accepted as inevitable. That evening, the palace hosted a grand dinner for visiting dignitaries. Alexander sat at the head table playing his role perfectly. Charming, confident, every inch the future king. Lady Margaret sat beside him, stunning in a sapphire gown that matched her cold blue eyes. She smiled and laughed at all the right moments, but Alexander noticed she never looked at the servants who served their food, never acknowledged the musicians who entertained them. Across the room, Isabella danced with Duke Edmund. The Duke was a decent man, if somewhat boring, and he clearly adored Isabella. Alexander watched as Edmund whispered something in Isabella's ear that made her laugh, and jealousy twisted in his stomach like a knife. After dinner, Alexander escaped to his study, seeking solitude among his books and maps. The room had always been his sanctuary, filled with dreams of exploration and adventure. Maps covered the walls, some of distant lands he hoped to visit, others of his own kingdom with notes about improvements he wanted to make. "Your Highness?" A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Isabella peered around the door. "May I come in?" Alexander gestured to the chair across from his desk. "You should be with your guests. Duke Edmund is discussing trade routes with the other nobles. I thought you might want some company." Isabella settled into the familiar chair where she had spent countless hours discussing books, politics, and dreams for the future. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier," Alexander began, carefully. "About just being ourselves." Isabella leaned forward. "And? What if we could be? What if there was a way to choose love over duty, at least once in our lives?" The question hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Isabella had spent her entire life preparing to sacrifice her happiness for her kingdom's welfare. The idea that there might be another path was both terrifying and exhilarating. "What are you suggesting?" she asked, though her heart was already racing with possibility. Alexander stood and moved to the window, looking out at the kingdom that would soon be his to rule. "There are stories, legends about kings and queens who chose differently, who found ways to serve their people while still following their hearts. Alexander, those are fairy tales. In the real world, princes marry for alliances and princesses do their duty. But what if they don't have to?" Alexander turned back to her, his eyes bright with sudden inspiration. "What if there was another way?" Before Isabella could respond, the study door burst open. King William, Alexander's father, strode in with the commanding presence that had made him one of the most respected rulers in the region. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his royal uniform immaculate, but his face showed the weight of 40 years on the throne. "Alexander, there you are. We need to discuss the final arrangements for your wedding. The Northern Territories delegation arrived this afternoon with specific requests about the ceremony." His eyes fell on Isabella. "Princess Isabella, I thought you were entertaining Duke Edmund." "I was just leaving." "Your Majesty," Isabella said quickly, rising from her chair. But as she passed Alexander, she whispered, "Think about what you said. Think about whether courage is worth more than comfort." After Isabella left, King William studied his son's face. "You look troubled, my boy. Wedding nerves are natural, but remember, this marriage will secure our kingdom's future for generations. Father, do you ever regret your choices? Do you ever wonder what might have been different if you had married for love instead of duty?" King William's expression softened slightly. "I loved your mother, Alexander. Perhaps not at first, but love grew between us over time. Duty and affection can coexist. But what if they can't? What if duty requires you to betray everything you believe about right and wrong?" The king frowned. "What are you talking about, son?" Alexander chose his words carefully. "Lady Margaret has very different ideas about ruling than I do. She believes the nobility should maintain distance from common people. She thinks our wealth should benefit only those already in power. How can I marry someone whose values oppose everything I want to accomplish as king? You will guide her thinking once you're married. A good king knows how to influence those around him. And if she refuses to change, if I spend my life fighting my own queen on every decision that matters? King William was quiet for a moment. Marriage is complicated, Alexander, but our personal happiness cannot come before our kingdom's security. That night, Alexander couldn't sleep. He walked through the palace gardens, following paths he had known since childhood. The moon was full, casting everything in silver light that made the familiar seem magical and strange. Near the rose garden, he found Isabella sitting on their old favorite bench, the one hidden behind a wall of climbing jasmine, where they used to meet as children to share secrets and dreams. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, settling beside her. "I keep thinking about choices," Isabella said, "about all the decisions that brought us to this moment. What if we had been born in different families? What if we lived in a world where love mattered more than treaties?" "We do live in that world," Alexander said suddenly. "We just have to be brave enough to create it." Isabella turned to look at him. "What do you mean?" Alexander took her hands in his. "Marry me, Isabella, not for alliance or duty or political gain. Marry me because we love each other and because together we could build something better than what exists now." "Alexander, that's impossible. You're engaged to Lady Margaret. I'm promised to Duke Edmund. Our kingdoms expect us to be strong leaders. But maybe being a strong leader means choosing love over fear, hope over tradition." Alexander's voice grew stronger as the idea took shape. "What if we proved that a marriage based on love and shared values could create a stronger alliance than one based only on political convenience?" Isabella felt her heart soaring and breaking at the same time. The scandal would be enormous. Both our families would be furious. Lady Margaret's father could declare war over the insult. Or, Alexander said, they could see that we're offering something better. A true partnership between kingdoms, not just a business arrangement. You know our people, Isabella. You care about them the way I do. Together we could change everything." Isabella stood and paced to the fountain in the center of the garden. The water sparkled in the moonlight, and she could hear night birds singing in the trees. Everything felt heightened, as if the world itself was holding its breath. "Even if our parents eventually accepted it, even if we could avoid war, we would be asking everyone to trust that love is stronger than traditional alliances. That's a huge risk to take with entire kingdoms at stake." Alexander joined her by the fountain. "The biggest risk is continuing to do things the way they've always been done. Look around us, Isabella. The world is changing. People want leaders who understand them, who fight for them, not just for political advantage. We could be those leaders. And if we fail? If we choose love and our kingdoms suffer for it?" Alexander was quiet for a moment, considering her question seriously. "Then at least we will have tried to build something worthy of the people we serve. At least we will have been true to our principles." Isabella felt tears sliding down her cheeks, though she wasn't sure if they were from joy or sorrow. "You're asking me to give up everything I've been taught to believe about duty and honor. I'm asking you to help me redefine what duty and honor mean. I'm asking you to believe that choosing love doesn't make us weak. It makes us brave." The garden was silent except for the splash of the fountain and the distant sound of palace guards making their rounds. Isabella closed her eyes and imagined it. A life with Alexander, working together to build a kingdom based on compassion and justice, raising children who would know they were loved rather than just politically useful. But she also imagined the alternative, the anger of their families, the potential for war, the possibility that their idealism could lead to real suffering for innocent people. "I need time to think," she said finally. This decision will affect thousands of lives, not just ours. Alexander nodded, though disappointment flickered across his face. How long? Give me 3 days. If we're going to do this, we need a plan. We need to find a way to make this work that protects both our kingdoms. And if you decide it's too risky? Isabella reached up and touched his cheek. Then we fulfill our original duties and spend the rest of our lives wondering what might have been. As they walked back toward the palace, neither spoke about the weight of the choice ahead of them, but both knew that in 3 days, everything would change. Either they would take a leap of faith into an uncertain future together, or they would say goodbye forever to the love that had defined both their hearts. The next morning would bring new challenges, new pressures, and new opportunities to choose between safety and courage. But for now, they walked in silence through gardens that held all their childhood memories, each lost in thoughts about a decision that would shape not just their own destinies, but the fate of everyone they had sworn to serve and protect. Isabella woke before dawn. Her mind immediately flooded with memories of the previous night's conversation. 3 days to decide between duty and love, between the safe path and the unknown. She dressed quietly and slipped out of her chambers, needing air and space to think clearly. The palace corridors were empty except for early-rising servants who curtsied as she passed. Isabella made her way to the old library, a forgotten wing of the palace where ancient books gathered dust on towering shelves. She had discovered this place as a child and often came here when she needed solitude. Among the leather-bound volumes, she found what she was looking for: histories of royal marriages, accounts of alliances that had shaped the continent for centuries. She pulled down book after book, searching for examples of rulers who had chosen love over duty, hoping to find guidance in the stories of those who came before. Most of the tales were cautionary: kings who lost their thrones for following their hearts, princesses who caused wars by refusing arranged marriages. But scattered among them were other stories, quieter ones. Queen Ava of Thornfield, who married a scholar instead of a neighboring prince and led her kingdom to an era of unprecedented learning and prosperity. King Marcus of Dalewood, who chose his childhood friend over a foreign princess and forged alliances through friendship rather than marriage. Finding anything useful? Alexander's voice made her jump. He stood in the doorway, fully dressed despite the early hour. Some encouraging examples, some terrifying warnings, Isabella said, gesturing to the pile of books around her. Mostly, I'm learning that every situation is different. Every choice has unexpected consequences. Alexander sat beside her on the window seat that overlooked the eastern courtyard. I've been thinking all night about what we discussed, about the risks. And I keep coming back to something my grandfather told me before he died. He said the greatest regret of his life wasn't the mistakes he made, but the opportunities he was too afraid to take. Alexander picked up one of the history books, thumbing through pages worn soft by centuries of readers. He married for duty, ruled wisely, but always wondered what might have happened if he had chosen differently. Isabella leaned against the window, watching servants hang laundry in the courtyard below. Their lives seemed so simple from this distance. Wake up, work, care for family, sleep. No kingdoms hanging in the balance, no treaties to consider. Lady Margaret arrived last night, Alexander continued. She wants to discuss our honeymoon plans. She's chosen a tour of the Northern Territory's most important trade cities. No stops for cultural sites. No meetings with common people, just business. And what did you tell her? That I would consider her suggestions. Alexander's voice carried a note of defeat. Isabella, the more time I spend with her, the more I realize we have nothing in common except our titles. She sees ruling as maintaining power. I see it as serving people. Those differences won't disappear after marriage. Isabella closed the book she had been reading and turned to face him fully. Alexander, I need to tell you something. Yesterday, before our conversation in the garden, Duke Edmund asked me about our wedding date. He wants to move it up. Alexander felt his stomach drop. How much? 2 weeks after your wedding to Lady Margaret. He says waiting longer would be disrespectful to your new marriage. Isabella's voice was steady, but Alexander could see the strain in her eyes. If I'm going to change my mind about this path, time is running shorter than we thought. The weight of their situation settled between them like a stone. In the distance, they could hear the palace coming alive, breakfast being prepared, horses being saddled, a kingdom expecting its future rulers to fulfill their destined roles. "There's something else," Isabella said quietly. "Last night I received a message from my mother. She's heard rumors about our friendship, about the time we spend together. She's worried people will talk." Alexander felt anger rise in his chest. People have always talked. We grew up together. Our kingdoms share borders. Of course we're friends. But we're not just friends anymore, are we? Isabella asked. And people can sense that, even if they don't understand what they're seeing. Before Alexander could respond, footsteps echoed in the corridor outside the library. They quickly moved apart, pretending to study separate books as a young servant appeared in the doorway. "Your Highness," the servant said to Alexander, "the king requests your presence in the throne room. The Northern Territories delegation wishes to discuss wedding protocols." Alexander sighed and stood. "Tell my father I'll be there shortly." After the servant left, he turned back to Isabella. "Will you be at the state dinner tonight?" "Duke Edmund specifically requested I sit beside him. He wants to announce our engagement officially." Isabella's voice carried a note of finality that made Alexander's heart race. "Then we're running out of time for careful consideration." "Yes, we are." They left the library separately, Alexander heading to face discussions about his unwanted wedding, Isabella walking slowly back to her chambers where her ladies-in-waiting would help her dress for another day of playing her expected role. In her room, Isabella's closest friend and lady-in-waiting, Charlotte, was already laying out clothes for the day. Charlotte had served Isabella since they were both teenagers, and she knew her mistress better than anyone. "You look like you haven't slept," Charlotte observed, holding up 2 different gowns. "The blue brings out your eyes, but the green matches your mood lately." Isabella chose the blue, hoping its cheerfulness might lift her spirits. As Charlotte helped her dress, Isabella found herself wondering if she could confide in her oldest friend. "Charlotte, do you ever think about what your life would be like if you could choose it completely freely?" Charlotte paused in braiding Isabella's hair. "My lady, that's a dangerous question for people like us." "But if you could?" Charlotte was quiet for a moment, focusing on weaving ribbons through Isabella's auburn locks. "I suppose I might have married the baker's son from my village. He was kind, made me laugh, but my family needed the income from royal service, and he needed someone who could help with his business, not someone whose duty was elsewhere." "Do you regret it?" "I try not to think about paths not taken, my lady. It makes the present harder to bear." Charlotte secured the final braid and stepped back to examine her work. "But you're asking for a reason. What's troubling you?" Isabella met Charlotte's eyes in the mirror. Charlotte had never married, had dedicated her life to royal service. She understood duty and sacrifice better than almost anyone. If you had to choose between your own happiness and your duty to the kingdom, which would you pick? "That depends," Charlotte said carefully, "on whether choosing happiness would truly harm the kingdom or just disappoint people who expect traditional choices." The wisdom in Charlotte's words struck Isabella like lightning. The real question wasn't whether she had a right to choose love over duty, but whether choosing love would actually harm her kingdom or simply challenge expectations. "Charlotte, what do people really think about the arranged marriages? Not the nobles, but ordinary people?" Charlotte considered this as she gathered the discarded nightgown. Honestly, my lady, most people want their rulers to be happy and strong. They believe happy leaders make better decisions. When King William married your aunt against his father's wishes 20 years ago, people celebrated because they could see he truly loved her. Isabella stared at Charlotte. My father never told me that story. It caused quite a stir at the time, but their marriage strengthened the alliance with the Eastern kingdoms because it was based on genuine partnership, not just political necessity. Charlotte moved to the window, adjusting curtains to let in more light. People remember that your parents' marriage brought real peace, not just signed treaties. This new information changed everything. Isabella had grown up believing that royal duty always required personal sacrifice, but here was proof that sometimes love and duty could align. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," Isabella called. Duke Edmund entered, dressed impeccably as always. He was handsome in a conventional way, tall, well-groomed, with intelligent brown eyes and a kind smile. Any woman should have been happy to marry him. "Good morning, Isabella. I hope you slept well." He kissed her hand formally, as was proper. "I wanted to discuss tonight's announcement before the dinner." Charlotte quietly excused herself, leaving them alone. Edmund led Isabella to the sitting area by the fireplace, where they could speak privately. "I know this marriage was arranged," Edmund began, "but I hope you know how much I've come to care for you over these past months. I believe we can build a good life together." Isabella felt a stab of guilt. Edmund was a decent man who deserved honesty, but she couldn't reveal her true feelings without potentially causing diplomatic damage. "Edmund, you've been very kind to me. I appreciate your patience with this arrangement." "I sense some hesitation in you lately," he said gently. "If there's anything troubling you about our marriage, please tell me." "I want you to be happy." The sincerity in his voice made Isabella's decision even more difficult. Edmund wasn't a villain she could easily reject. He was a good man who would make someone an excellent husband, just not her. "Marriage is a big change for anyone," Isabella said carefully. "I think some nervousness is natural." Edmund nodded. "Of course. But Isabella, I want you to know that I understand your intelligence and your passion for helping people. I would never expect you to simply be a decorative wife. I hope we can work together to strengthen both our kingdoms." His words were exactly what she should have wanted to hear. He was offering partnership, respect, and affection. Everything a practical marriage needed to succeed. "Thank you, Edmund. That means a great deal to me." After he left, Isabella felt more confused than ever. How could she justify breaking an engagement to a good man for the uncertain promise of love with Alexander? How could she risk both their kingdom's stability for her own happiness? She spent the rest of the morning walking through the palace gardens, visiting places that held memories of her friendship with Alexander. The rose garden, where they had shared their first serious conversation about politics. The fountain where they had made wishes as children. The hidden bench where they had talked about their dreams for the future. At each location, she tried to imagine what life would be like if she chose differently. Marriage to Duke Edmund would be comfortable, safe, predictable. She would live in a beautiful castle, have intelligent children, and contribute to her kingdom's welfare. It wasn't what she had dreamed of, but it was more than many people ever had. But marriage to Alexander would be an adventure into uncharted territory. Together, they could try to prove that love and duty weren't opposing forces, that strong marriages could create strong alliances. They shared the same vision for their kingdom's future, the same passion for justice and progress. The risk, though, was enormous. If their families refused to accept their choice, if the political fallout was severe, innocent people could suffer for their idealism. Late in the afternoon, Isabella made her way to the palace chapel, a peaceful space where she often went to think. The late afternoon sun streamed through stained glass windows, casting colored patterns on the stone floor. She wasn't alone. Queen Mother Catherine, Alexander's grandmother, knelt in the front pew. At 85, she was the wisest person Isabella knew, someone who had navigated decades of royal politics with grace and intelligence. "Your Majesty," Isabella said, approaching quietly. "Isabella, dear, come sit with me." Queen Mother Catherine patted the pew beside her. "I was just thinking about choices and consequences. It seems to be a theme lately." Isabella settled beside the elderly queen, wondering if she somehow knew about the decision Isabella faced. "Your Majesty, may I ask you something personal? At my age, personal questions are the only interesting ones left." Isabella smiled despite her anxiety. "Do you ever regret the choices you made when you were young?" Queen Mother Catherine was quiet for a long moment, studying the altar where she had been married 58 years ago. "I regret the chances I didn't take more than the ones I did. I spent too many years worrying about what others would think instead of trusting my own judgment. But you made a good marriage, had a good life." "I did. But I wonder sometimes what might have happened if I had been braver. If I had spoken up when I disagreed with policies I thought were wrong, if I had pursued friendships with people outside my social circle, if I had traveled to places that intrigued me instead of only visiting kingdoms that were politically useful." Isabella felt her pulse quicken. "Do you think it's ever acceptable for royalty to put personal desires before duty? That depends on whether the personal desire is selfish or whether it might actually serve the kingdom better." Queen Mother Catherine turned to look directly at Isabella. "Sometimes what looks like duty is really just fear of change." The words hit Isabella like a revelation. How much of her hesitation was really about duty, and how much was simply fear? "Your Majesty, if someone had to choose between a safe, expected path and a risky one that might create something better, what would you advise?" Queen Mother Catherine smiled, her eyes twinkling with the wisdom of someone who had lived through decades of political upheaval and social change. "I would ask them whether they want to be remembered as someone who maintained the status quo, or someone who had the courage to build something new." As evening approached and the time for the state dinner drew near, Isabella returned to her chambers to prepare. Charlotte helped her into an elegant emerald gown, arranged diamonds in her hair, and applied subtle makeup that enhanced her natural beauty. "You look beautiful, my lady," Charlotte said, "but you look sad." Isabella studied her reflection in the mirror. She did look sad, she realized. Despite the beautiful gown and jewelry, despite the privilege and luxury surrounding her, she looked like someone preparing for her own execution rather than a celebration. "Charlotte, do you think it's possible to love someone so much that being without them feels like betraying yourself?" Charlotte met her eyes in the mirror. "Yes, my lady, I do." "Even if choosing that love disappoints everyone who depends on you?" "Especially then," Charlotte said softly. "Because disappointed people can learn to understand new choices, but betraying yourself, that damage lasts a lifetime." The dinner bell chimed in the distance. Soon, Isabella would sit beside Duke Edmund as he announced their engagement to the assembled nobility. Once the announcement was made, changing course would be exponentially more difficult. She stood, smoothed her gown, and walked toward the dining hall where her future waited to be determined. But as she reached the grand staircase that led to the main floor, she saw Alexander waiting at the bottom, dressed in his formal royal uniform. Their eyes met across the space between them, and Isabella felt her heart make its choice even as her mind still wrestled with consequences. In his gaze, she saw not just love, but partnership, shared purpose, and the possibility of building something beautiful together. Alexander extended his hand to escort her to dinner, as protocol demanded. But as their fingers touched, Isabella realized that some decisions weren't made by careful consideration of all factors. Some decisions were made by the heart, in moments when courage mattered more than caution. "Alexander," she said quietly as they walked toward the dining hall. "After dinner, can we talk privately?" "Of course." "I think," Isabella said, her voice growing stronger with each word, "I think I'm ready to change the world." Alexander's step faltered slightly, but his grip on her hand tightened. "Are you certain?" Isabella looked ahead to the dining hall, where Duke Edmund waited to announce their engagement, where Lady Margaret sat expecting to finalize wedding plans, where their families and assembled nobility expected them to fulfill traditional roles. "I'm terrified," Isabella admitted. "But yes, I'm certain." The massive doors to the dining hall opened before them, revealing a room full of people who had no idea that everything was about to change. Isabella took a deep breath, lifted her chin, and walked forward to face the most important evening of her life. The state dining hall blazed with candlelight and crystal, filled with the most powerful nobles from across the region. Isabella felt the weight of hundreds of eyes as she and Alexander entered together, their formal entrance marking the beginning of an evening that would change everything. Duke Edmund rose from his seat at the high table, his face lighting up as he saw Isabella. Lady Margaret sat beside Alexander's empty chair, stunning in a gown of silver silk that caught the light with her every movement. King William presided over the gathering with the natural authority that came from decades of rule, while Isabella's parents, King Richard and Queen Eleanor of Westmore, smiled proudly at their daughter. As Alexander escorted Isabella to her place at the table, she could feel the familiar rhythm of royal protocol surrounding her. Soon, speeches would be made, toasts offered, and Duke Edmund would announce their engagement. The machinery of tradition moved forward with inexorable momentum, but Isabella had made her choice. During the first course, conversation flowed around topics of trade, weather, and diplomatic news. Isabella participated automatically, her mind focused on what she would say when the moment came. Beside her, Duke Edmund was charming and attentive, clearly anticipating the announcement he would soon make. "You seem quiet tonight," he observed during a lull in conversation. "Are you feeling well?" "I'm fine," Isabella replied, managing a smile. "Just thinking." Across the table, Alexander caught her eye. In his gaze, she saw understanding, support, and a question. Was she still certain about their decision? Isabella gave the smallest nod, and she saw relief flood his face. Lady Margaret was speaking animatedly about wedding preparations, her voice carrying clearly down the table. "The Northern Territory's finest musicians will perform, and we've commissioned new tapestries depicting the union of our kingdoms. It will be quite spectacular." "I'm sure it will be beautiful," Queen Elena said diplomatically, though Isabella noticed a slight strain in her mother's voice. Her parents had grown increasingly concerned about Lady Margaret's attitudes toward common people during the week-long visit. As servants cleared the main course and prepared to serve dessert, King William rose from his chair. The hall fell silent immediately, all attention focused on the monarch. "My friends and honored guests," King William began, his voice resonating through the vast room. "Tonight we celebrate not just friendship between kingdoms, but the bonds that will shape our future. Duke Edmund has requested permission to make an announcement regarding his engagement to Princess Isabella." Isabella felt her pulse racing as Duke Edmund stood, his face glowing with happiness. This was the moment. In seconds, she could either allow tradition to claim her future or find the courage to speak for herself. "Your Majesty, honored guests," Duke Edmund began, "it has been my greatest privilege to court Princess Isabella over these past months. Tonight, with the blessing of both our families, I am proud to announce—" "Wait!" Isabella's voice cut through the formal atmosphere like a blade. She stood slowly, her legs unsteady beneath her. The entire hall turned to stare at her, confusion rippling through the crowd. Duke Edmund looked stunned. "Isabella, what?" "I'm sorry, Edmund. I'm so very sorry." Isabella's voice grew stronger as she spoke. "You are a good man, and you deserve someone who can love you completely. But I cannot marry you." Gasps echoed through the hall. King Richard and Queen Elena stared at their daughter in horror. Lady Margaret's face went pale with shock, but Isabella kept her eyes fixed on Alexander, drawing strength from his steady gaze. "Isabella," her mother called sharply, "sit down immediately. You're overtired, not thinking clearly." "I am thinking more clearly than I ever have in my life," Isabella replied, turning to address the entire room. "For weeks I have struggled with a choice between duty and truth. I was taught that royal marriages must serve political purposes, that personal happiness is secondary to kingdom welfare." King William's face darkened with anger. "Princess Isabella, you will cease this inappropriate display immediately." But Isabella continued, her voice ringing with conviction. "I have spent the last 3 days studying the marriages of our ancestors, reading accounts of alliances built on genuine partnership versus those built solely on political convenience. What I learned is that the strongest unions, the ones that truly served their kingdoms, were founded on shared values and mutual respect, not just convenient treaties." Duke Edmund sank back into his chair, his face stricken with hurt and confusion. "Isabella, if I have done something to displease you, if there's something I can change—" "Edmund, you have done nothing wrong. You are honorable, kind, and intelligent. But we want different things for our kingdoms. You see marriage as a pleasant arrangement between suitable partners. I need it to be a true partnership between people who share the same dreams for the future." Lady Margaret found her voice first. "This is ridiculous. Royal marriages have always been about alliance, not romantic fantasy. Princess Isabella, you're being childish and selfish." "Perhaps," Isabella agreed, "but I'm also being honest." She turned to face Alexander, who had been sitting in stunned silence. "Prince Alexander, you understand what I mean about shared dreams, don't you?" Alexander felt every eye in the room focus on him. This was the moment when he could either support Isabella's courage or retreat into safety. The choice that would define not just their personal futures, but the kind of leader he would become. He stood slowly, his heart pounding. "Yes, I do understand." King William's voice was dangerous. "Alexander, you will sit down and remain silent." "I'm sorry, father, but I cannot." Alexander's voice carried the authority of someone who had finally found his true purpose. "Princess Isabella is right. Marriage should be about partnership, about two people working together to build something better than either could create alone." The implications of his words sent shockwaves through the assembled nobles. Lady Margaret's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "You cannot be serious. Our wedding is in 2 weeks. Our families have planned for months." "Lady Margaret," Alexander said gently, "you deserve a husband who admires not just your beauty and intelligence, but your vision for the future. We have very different ideas about how to rule, how to treat our people, how to use our privilege. Those differences won't disappear after marriage." Lady Margaret stood, her face flushed with humiliation and rage. "This is about her, isn't it?" She pointed at Isabella. "This ridiculous display is because you two think you're in love." "We are in love," Isabella said clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "But more than that, we share the same values, the same dreams for our kingdom's futures. Together, we could create an alliance built not just on signed treaties, but on genuine partnership and shared purpose." The hall erupted in chaos. Nobles shouted questions and protests. King William demanded order. and the Northern Territories delegation huddled in urgent conference. Through it all, Alexander crossed the space between his chair and Isabella's, taking her hand in a gesture that declared his choice to the entire world. "This is madness," King Richard called out, his voice carrying over the din. "Isabella, you have lost your mind. Alexander, your behavior is disgraceful." Queen Mother Catherine, who had been silent throughout the evening, rose from her chair with the dignity that came from 8 decades of navigating royal politics. The hall gradually quieted as people noticed her standing. "If I may," she said, her voice still strong despite her age, "I have lived through more royal marriages than anyone else in this room. I have seen alliances built on fear, convenience, and tradition. I have also seen partnerships built on mutual respect and shared vision." She looked directly at Isabella and Alexander. "The strongest marriages I have witnessed were between people who chose each other not just as spouses, but as partners in building something meaningful." "Mother," King William said impatiently, "this is not the time for romantic idealism." "This is exactly the time," Queen Mother Catherine replied firmly, "because what I see before me are 2 young people who understand that leadership requires courage, not just obedience to tradition." She turned to address the room. "King William, you chose love over convenience when you married Elena 20 years ago, despite significant opposition. Your marriage has been stronger than many arranged, purely for political gain." Isabella felt a surge of hope. Queen Mother Catherine was the most respected voice in the room, and her support carried enormous weight. Duke Edmund stood slowly, his dignity intact despite his obvious pain. "Princess Isabella, I thank you for your honesty, though I wish it had come sooner. You are right that we want different things from marriage and life." He looked around the room, then back at Isabella. "I release you from our engagement willingly." "I would rather be alone than married to someone whose heart belongs elsewhere." His gracious response earned murmurs of approval from the assembled nobles. Duke Edmund's handling of the situation with dignity and understanding made him appear more admirable than if the engagement had proceeded as planned. Lady Margaret, however, was not so gracious. "This is unacceptable. Prince Alexander, our marriage has been planned for a year. Treaties have been signed, preparations made. You cannot simply change your mind because of infatuation with another woman." "The treaties can be renegotiated," Alexander replied. "And this isn't infatuation, Lady Margaret. Isabella and I have been friends since childhood. What we offer is a marriage that could create a stronger alliance than one based solely on political convenience." Lord Blackwood. Lady Margaret's father and leader of the Northern Territories delegation stood with obvious anger. "This is an insult to my family and my kingdom. We will not tolerate such treatment." But before anyone could respond, an unexpected voice joined the conversation. Lord Brennan, one of the most respected older nobles present, stood and addressed the room. "Lord Blackwood, with respect, perhaps we should consider what this proposal actually means for our kingdoms." Lord Brennan's voice carried the authority of someone who had served as an advisor to 3 different kings. Princess Isabella and Prince Alexander are both heirs to their thrones. A marriage between them would unite 3 kingdoms under one alliance, rather than creating separate partnerships through different marriages. The room fell silent as nobles began calculating the political implications. A marriage between Isabella and Alexander would indeed create a more powerful alliance than the original arrangements. Furthermore, Lord Brennan continued, both Princess Isabella and Prince Alexander are known for their concern for common people, their interest in educational and economic reforms, and their diplomatic skills. A partnership between rulers who share the same values could create unprecedented stability in our region. Isabella felt hope rising in her chest. Lord Brennan was articulating exactly what she and Alexander had dreamed of, the possibility that their love could actually serve their kingdoms better than the traditional arrangements. Queen Eleanor spoke for the first time since Isabella's announcement. "Isabella, are you certain this is what you want? Marriage to Prince Alexander would mean leaving your homeland, taking on enormous responsibilities." "Mother," Isabella replied, "I have thought about little else for days. Alexander and I complement each other's strengths and share the same vision for our people's future. Together, we could accomplish things that neither of us could achieve alone." King William looked older than his years as he processed the evening's revelations. "Alexander, explain to me how this improves upon the alliances we had already secured." Alexander took a deep breath, knowing his next words would shape his relationship with his father and his future as king. "Father, Lady Margaret sees ruling as maintaining power and privilege. Isabella sees it as service to our people. The Northern Territories alliance would have given us military and economic advantages, but Isabella brings something more valuable, a partner who will help me become the kind of leader our kingdom needs." "And what about the Northern Territories?" Lady Margaret demanded. "Are we to be cast aside because your son prefers romantic fantasy to political reality?" Before Alexander could answer, Lord Brennan spoke again. "Lady Margaret, you are intelligent, beautiful, and well-educated. You could make an excellent marriage with any number of suitable nobles, perhaps someone who shares your particular vision for leadership." The subtle suggestion that Lady Margaret might find a better match elsewhere diffused some of the tension in the room. Several unmarried nobles exchanged glances, clearly considering the possibility. Isabella's father, King Richard, stood and addressed the room with the measured tone that had made him successful in decades of diplomatic negotiations. "This evening has been unexpected, but perhaps we need time to consider all the implications before making final decisions." "I agree," said Duke Edmund. "This affects multiple kingdoms and many lives. We should not make permanent choices in the heat of the moment." But Isabella felt panic rising. If they allowed time for consideration, pressure and politics would inevitably push them back toward the traditional arrangements. "Your Majesty," she said, addressing King William directly, "I understand that this is sudden and complicated, but I ask you to consider whether the strongest alliances come from force or from choice." Alexander stepped forward to stand beside Isabella, their united front clear to everyone watching. "Father, I have never asked you for anything purely for my own happiness, but I'm asking now. Give Isabella and me the chance to prove that a marriage based on love and shared values can create a stronger alliance than one based only on political convenience." King William stared at his son and Isabella for a long moment, seeing not just young people in love, but potential partners who could indeed complement each other's strengths and serve their kingdoms with unusual dedication. Finally, Queen Mother Catherine spoke once more. "William, you have raised a son who thinks for himself and cares deeply about his responsibilities. Isabella has grown into a woman who combines intelligence with courage. Perhaps it's time to trust their judgment." The king was quiet for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Very well. I will consider a marriage between Alexander and Isabella, provided all affected kingdoms agree to the new arrangement and provided suitable alternative alliances can be negotiated." The room erupted again, but this time with excitement and possibility rather than shock. Nobles immediately began discussing implications, opportunities, and adjustments that would need to be made. Over the next several hours, as the evening transformed from a formal dinner into an impromptu diplomatic negotiation, details began to take shape. Duke Edmund graciously agreed to consider other alliance possibilities. Lady Margaret, after her initial anger subsided, admitted that she had been having her own doubts about marrying someone whose values differed so significantly from her own. Most surprisingly, Lord Blackwood eventually conceded that the proposed arrangement might actually benefit the Northern Territories more than the original plan. A three-kingdom alliance would be stronger than two separate partnerships, he admitted grudgingly. As dawn approached and exhausted nobles finally began to disperse, Isabella and Alexander found themselves alone on the palace balcony where their conversation had begun just days earlier. "I can't believe we did that," Isabella said, laughing with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "You did that," Alexander corrected, pulling her close. "You were incredibly brave in there." "We both were. And now we have to prove that love really can create stronger alliances than fear and tradition." Alexander kissed her forehead. "We will. We'll spend our lives proving that choosing courage over comfort was the right decision." In the distance, the sun rose over their kingdoms, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Isabella felt a sense of peace she had never experienced before. For the first time in her life, she had chosen her own path, spoken her own truth, and discovered that courage could indeed create possibilities that hadn't existed before. "What are you thinking about?" Alexander asked, noticing her smile. "I'm thinking about our children," Isabella replied. "How we'll teach them that duty and love don't have to be opposing forces. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to accept that things have to be the way they've always been." Alexander looked out over the kingdom that would soon be theirs to rule together. "We'll teach them that real strength comes from authentic partnerships, that the best leaders are those who choose hope over fear." As palace life began to stir around them, Isabella and Alexander stood together on the balcony, no longer bound by other people's expectations, free to build a future based on their own values and dreams. The choice Isabella had made in those crucial moments at dinner had changed not just their personal destinies, but had opened up new possibilities for entire kingdoms. Their love story would be remembered not just as a romance, but as proof that sometimes the most radical act is simply telling the truth about what you believe and having the courage to live according to those beliefs, regardless of what tradition demands. In the weeks that followed, as new alliances were forged and wedding plans were reimagined, Isabella and Alexander discovered that their choice had inspired other young nobles to question whether duty always required personal sacrifice. Their example created ripple effects throughout their societies, encouraging others to believe that authentic partnerships could indeed create stronger foundations for the future than arrangements based purely on political convenience. And when they finally stood together at the altar 6 months later, exchanging vows they had written themselves, promising to serve their people with courage and compassion, Isabella realized that the life-changing choice had been not just about choosing love over duty, but about redefining what duty actually meant. True duty, they had learned, sometimes required the courage to build something new rather than simply maintaining what had always been. Their marriage became legendary, not because it was perfect, but because it proved that when two people share genuine partnership and commitment to something greater than themselves, they can indeed change the world, one brave choice at a time.